Welcome to Speak Up with Laurel Libby. Today, I am thrilled to have as my guest Jason Isaac. Jason is the founder and CEO of the American Energy Institute and host of the High Carbon Lifestyle podcast. He calls himself the Carbon King, and his mission is simple: raise America's energy IQ and make the case that affordable, reliable energy is the foundation of human flourishing, not a luxury, not a problem to be apologized for. A fourth-generation Texan, Jason served 4 terms in the Texas House of Representatives, where he sat on the Energy Resources and Environmental Regulation Committee. His work has been featured in Fox News, Fox Business, The Hill, The Daily Caller, Real Clear Energy, and Bloomberg Law. And he's testified before the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee and House Judiciary Committee. Jason lives in Central Texas with his wife, State Rep Carrie Isaac, and their 2 sons. Jason, we're so pleased to have you here with us today. Why don't you start us off with a little bit more introduction to yourself and your work?
Yeah, you said that I call myself the Carbon King. It was actually a Democrat member of Congress who referred to me as that during one of my testimonies, because I tell people I live a high carbon lifestyle, and I think the rest of the world should too. It's really where you have economic prosperity, you have environmental leadership. Those go hand in hand. There's no question about it. There are no low energy rich countries. They don't exist. Other people should live like we get to live, to take for granted the things that we take for granted: clean water coming out of a tap, the lights coming on at a switch. And so I made this introduction in front of Congress, and I was sitting by a couple of brilliant people, Stephen Moore and Mandy Gunasekara, and I was sitting right between them, and I tell this, and I always get chuckles when I tell people, I'm Jason Isaac, and I live a high carbon lifestyle. And I think the rest of the world should too. And it kind of just Jamie Raskin, the Democrat from Maryland, kind of wagged his finger at me and shook his head and referred to us as the Carbon Kings. He's like, I'm up here with a bunch of Carbon Kings, and I was like, wow. And I looked at my notes after 4 hours of this hearing, sitting there, and that was all I'd written down. And I'm a marketing guy. I studied marketing in college and high school, and then in college, and just learning how to better communicate, try to communicate more effectively, and at the same time have a little bit of fun, because I am kind of sarcastic and don't take myself too seriously. But that's all I had written down was Carbon King. At the end of
Did you
4
get t-shirts
hours,
made at that point?
well, as a matter of fact, I have shirts that say "Carbon is life." I may have one on my computer here that says "Carbon is life," which yeah, and I have shirts as well. I'm getting hats that say "Carbon is life." My wife made costumes for us one Halloween. I was the Carbon King and she was the Carbon Queen. We had like a mast with a pump jack, or my crown had a pump jack on it, and we actually have coal from a coal mine in Wyoming. So it's just.
So this is not the insult that he intended it to be,
It
or it
was
didn't work
not.
out that way.
I love it when the left tries to insult me, and I'm like, wait, this is my brand name. I have it printed on my wallet, my name tags, my license plates, my business cards. So, but the no Kings protest apparently don't apply to me, since I was anointed
No.
by a Democrat. So I'm allowed. I don't. They're not protesting against the Carbon King. It was a Democrat that anointed me. So I have a little bit of fun with it, but I really honestly believe that the rest of the world, and there's Chris Wright, our Secretary of Energy, a longtime friend since the late 2000 teens. He says there's 7 billion people on the planet that don't get to live like the 1 billion do, the 1 billion wealthy people that live on the planet that have access to affordable and reliable energy. And then we should be doing everything we can. And so I get up every day and it's like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to work to eliminate poverty around the world. And you do that with access to energy, whether you liberate women from walking countless miles and spending countless hours. The UNICEF has counted it, says it's 200 million hours a day that women spend walking to collect water around the world. I assure you that my wife and you are probably not spending, hours or walking over 3 miles on average, but the average, women will average over 3 miles today, and that includes you and my wife. But and again, my wife's not walking that near that far to collect water.
Right.
So other women around the world are sharing a major burden in that, and you can liberate them and give them more freedom. It's an hour today to collect animal dung and biomass and other things to heat up that water to make it somewhat potable. And so I love it. Chris Wright started this nonprofit called Bettering Human Lives Foundation, named after his report to shareholders that he puts out every year. It's kind of the counter ESG report, this environmental, social, and governance report. He put out a Bettering Human Lives report because energy does that. It does better human lives. And then he started this nonprofit foundation that works to get people in third world countries access to propane cooktops, like little propane burners. And so that they can use that to heat up water, frees up an hour a day. Energy is absolutely liberating to people around the world. Imagine having an extra hour to get involved with raising your family or civic
Imagine that.
engagement.
I
I
mean,
mean,
that speaks to the human flourishing, right?
it really does. I mean,
When you're
there's a
not
study.
spending all of your time walking 3 miles average to get water and can spend that time doing something infinitely more valuable,
Absolutely.
invest your time differently.
Yes, that's what we spend our time doing, is to better human lives.
Yes. So that's kind of a global picture. What does this look like, this high carbon lifestyle in Maine, where we're relying on oil and burning wood in our 6 months out of the year, maybe 7, 8 months out of the year that are very chilly? How does that translate to a state like Maine?
Well, actually, and you're burning garbage as well
Yeah.
too, and that's
Yes,
something that
absolutely.
I love to track when your regional grid operators are burning garbage,
Hmm.
to because the unreliables aren't producing, and that's what's happened is we've had this incredible misallocation, I've been diving into this for 2 decades now, looking into why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we designing markets, grids to invest in, and it's a really malinvestment, to waste money on things that don't work, that are incredibly expensive. And I
You
served in the
mean all of the
legislature.
solar fields in Maine?
Yeah, oh my gosh, and they take up massive amounts of land, and so I'm kind of on my repentance tour because I was one of these politicians in Texas last decade, served 4 terms in the Texas House, and I heard from lobbyists and these groups that were and constituents that were saying, "Oh, we need to convert, we need to do the energy transition. We need to get off of fossil fuels." And I'm like, "Well, wait, why?" Oh, and they're like, "Oh, because of the environmental harms." And I kept thinking, "Well, what environmental harms are we talking about?" And everything they were talking about was CO2, this trace
Mhm.
gas in the atmosphere that's necessary for life on Earth. And I'm thinking about criteria pollutants, the 6 criteria pollutants that are regulated by the Clean Air Act, the Environmental Protection Agency, passed in the early 70s. And then I start to look into the numbers. I'm like, wait, we've reduced pollution. Gosh, at the beginning of my service, we were down like 60 some odd percent over
Wow.
the last 4 decades. Now, over the last 5 decades, we're nearly an 80% reduction of pollutants that in certain concentrations impact human health. And I'm like, that's a huge win. Why aren't we telling this
Mhm.
story? And
Mhm.
then we had the COVID lockdowns. And I heard electric vehicle lobbyists say in Austin one time at a seminar, and he made this comment. He said, during the first 2 months of the COVID lockdowns, we improved air quality so much in Austin because of the half the cars were off the road. And so
A lot
because
of
of
people
that,
have.
we need everybody needs to drive an electric vehicle. And I'm like,
Wow.
wow. And so I served on the Environmental Regulation Committee. I visited our Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I met with officials from the Environmental Protection Agency.
Mhm.
I know the data is out there. Let's go look at the monitors because I'm a high fact finder. I want to look and see what
Mm.
the facts say. So I looked at the air quality monitors, and during the first 2 months of the COVID lockdowns in the city of Austin, the air quality got worse.
Oh gosh, that was
It was
not the result
it was
that
not. And I'm
they'd
like,
be
this
expecting.
is not even close to what he said. He said it improved so
Mhm.
much that everybody should drive electric vehicles. Never mind those people that lost their businesses and their homes and their lives
Right.
because of the COVID lockdowns, and just the devastation that caused.
Mhm.
He's worried about some air quality improvements. And I'm like, wait, it
Well,
didn't
that's like
improve.
the blindered view on this is the only thing that matters.
That's right. Yeah.
And then no other factors matter. Human flourishing certainly does not come into play.
No, 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 not at all. And that's what I get into this movement. I realize it's more about control than anything else. It's decarbonization, which doesn't do anything to mitigate a changing climate. And I think that's where a lot of the people you've had some of the people that don't support my work, namely the multinational big majors, oil and gas producers, they've bought into this agenda. They're building carbon capture facilities. Don't do anything. I just saw the world's largest carbon capture facility opened in Iceland, and you look at the amount of CO2 that it's gonna suck from the air, I'm like, "This is just absurd." Like, what a waste of time and money and effort.
Mm.
In order to reduce our concentrations by 1 part per million, I looked yesterday, we're at 429 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. To put that into a percentage, it's 0.0429.
Wow.
That's the percentage of CO2 in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's really, really low. But to reduce it by 1 part per million, we would need to build 217,000 of those carbon capture facilities.
217,000.
Yes. Yep. So we are talking massive trillions, likely hundreds of trillions of dollars to reduce
Wow.
our atmospheric concentration of CO2 by 1 part per million.
I'm guessing that the liberal left would support those more than they do data centers.
They would, and I've made the comment that these big companies should be doing direct air capture of humidity because that's water, and it's like about 6 or 7 times more prevalent in the atmosphere, and it's more of a heat trapping gas than CO2. And so if you're really concerned that there's a little bit of mild manageable warming happening, hey, we build these, these massive dehumidifiers and use the water for data centers. I mean, there's your
Two birds,
problem
one
solved with
stone.
water. So I really kind of go after the climate cult and the climate cartel, and really what they're pushing with decarbonization, because it all comes down to that one thing. And I tell people decarbonization is dangerous, deadly, and dumb. It doesn't do anything to mitigate a changing climate. There are paleoclimatologists now that are saying that man's increase in concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere has nothing to do with temperature fluctuations over the last 200 years. And they say that the planet is warming, it's driven by the sun, and that is increasing CO2 emissions. It's not the other way around.
Well, you're certainly right to call it the climate cult. Of course, here in Maine, we have the push to be 100% renewable energy by 2040. And the feel-good policies that get passed, like no more plastic trash bag and no more plastic bags in stores. Don't look for those if you go to Walmart or Hannaford up here in Maine. But then the really, really harmful ones where the policies around solar are driving up costs so much for Maine people. Um, I, I think we've gotten to this place where, if you speak against these policies, shame on you. You are kind of um, you're guilted, right? Anyone that is going against this agenda is they try to guilt you into, well, why don't you want this for Maine people? And it's the opposite of flourishing because it's costing them an arm and a leg in so many different ways.
Yeah, it really is. And I was just talking about this earlier at a Austin Chamber of Commerce infrastructure event and talking about Texas and what we've done since Winter Storm Uri, where we lost hundreds of people, froze to death,
Yeah.
died of carbon monoxide poisoning, a dangerous gas in high concentrations. Because they were burning furniture in their homes, they were sitting in their cars and garages, absolutely appalling, but literally people freezing to death in their homes. Um, and so I was talking about how we've kind of responded, and what we've responded is we've told older aging thermal equipment that works that you can't do maintenance as often. You're going to be at the whims of grid managers, and so our thermal generation fleet from natural gas, coal, and nuclear is aging, and it's over half of our installed capacity is over 30 years old. That's a problem. And over the last 5 years, we've added 56 gigawatts of new electric generation capacity. And people are like, oh, that's fantastic. Well, 53 of it is wind, solar, and batteries.
Wow. Okay.
We've added 3 gigawatts of natural gas, but our market, and this is the case around the United States, markets aren't formed to reward reliability.
Ah.
And so that's where you have this misallocation of resources. And you look at electric generation, it's about $1 billion a gigawatt. It doesn't matter if it's wind, solar, short duration batteries, natural gas, it's about $1 billion a gigawatt to build new generation. And so what Texas has done is we've spent $56 billion on generation capacity over the last 5 years that ratepayers are going to be on the hook paying for. And they're also going to be paying for transmission costs to bring unreliable, not dense energy out from the middle of nowhere into the centers where people actually need it, when we should be building generation close to where people are. So we're not having to pay billions of dollars for transmission cost alone. So $56 billion, we would be in a amazing position if our market was designed to reward reliability. We would have built about 12 to 15 gigawatts of natural gas. Ratepayers would only be absorbing 12 to 15 billion dollars rather than 56 over the next couple of decades. Our cost would be astronomically lower, and our electricity would be much more reliable.
I mean, less than a quarter, less than a
Yeah,
quarter of
it's
the price.
crazy, but that's the way the market is designed, and it's unfortunate. I've talked to the Department of Energy officials that said if grids really did cost benefit analysis, the only thing that would be getting built right now is natural gas. The only thing, and that's just because you look at the cost of natural gas here in the United States compared to Europe.
Absolutely. And here in Maine, folks say, well, the price of natural gas is high. Well, of course, the price of natural gas is high. We have those in power who are reluctant is a kind word to say, reluctant to allow expansion of the natural gas pipelines and supply and demand. So we are, restricted here. There was even a year ago, there was a push to slowly do away with natural gas in Maine, which failed, thankfully. But that's the direction that the left in Augusta want to take things, is to restrict options and only have, wind, solar, the renewables that they like available.
Yeah, and that's when I was in the legislature, that's what I was led to believe. Like, oh, this is a great investment. It's going to bring investment dollars out to rural America on this land that's not being used for anything else. And the farmers and ranchers out there deserve to get a little bit more money because they're not making anything farming and ranching. And so we're going to create all these jobs. And then you're like, wait a second. When I go to, like, Chipotle and get a salad, I have one or two people that help me. But really, if I wanted to, I could have 16 people help me. It wouldn't be very efficient, but think of all the jobs I'd create. Now, my
Sure.
salad at the end of the line, it'd be $150. I wouldn't be able to afford it, but
Right.
just look at all the jobs I created. And that's really kind of like this analogy that I've tried to create here, is because wind and solar, when you look at the amount of electricity they create, they require 8.3 more jobs than that of natural gas, coal, and
Mm,
nuclear. So, the jobs, the numbers are there, but it's
sure.
a complete waste. You don't need 35 people to change the oil in your car. It takes like one person,
And
maybe
I'm
maybe
sorry.
two or three by the time you check out and pay if you don't do it yourself. And
Absolutely.
but it's a
But the
really
argument there
misallocation of
that I think that
resources.
you guys can make in Texas is a little different from the argument that they make here in Maine. I mean, we have completely different climates. And when you try to bring California or Texas energy policies to Maine, I mean, it's apples and bananas.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, when you try to do this electrification of everything, oh, we'll do electric heat pumps. Well, they don't work really well when it's really cold outside,
Hmm.
and that's when you need heat. You know what
Hmm.
does work really well? Natural gas, propane in rural areas. Propane's a great fuel to transport. You can put it in a truck. I mean, this is the fuel that's going to liberate millions of people in Africa by just getting them clean cooking fuels. It
Mm.
helps with air quality inside your home incredibly if you're using clean cooking fuels. But if you're burning wood or another country's dung, that's really not that clean inside your home.
Mm. So, I hear folks here in Maine blaming CMP or Versant. Those are our power companies. They
Mhm.
say, oh gosh, I got my bill and the prices are through the roof, which they are. And so folks see that bill and it's easy to blame, right? So CMP is giving me this terrible bill again, but it is a complex topic. And where are you seeing, from your research, what families are paying? How much is driven by the market? How much is driven by policies? And how much is driven by corporate greed, the catch-all?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with corporate greed, virtue signaling, and embracing political agendas. This ESG, this environmental, social, and governance, which I've been working on since 2018 when I first started hearing about it, trying to expose it. I refer to it as everyone's suffering guaranteed. But there's been this big push. It's a European globalist political agenda to get companies to embrace certain things that are outside the bounds of the law, really beyond what the law requires. We saw access to capital for oil and gas exploration, production, transportation decreased significantly. It was about a 95% reduction in private capital over just about 4 or 5 years from the mid-teens to the early 20s. You get about 94% reduction in the number of funds. So you had a lot of companies that were investing in oil and gas 2015, 94% reduction by
Wow.
2020. And it was because you had some of these large global institutions, I refer to them as the big three, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, really denying access to capital to companies if they were investing in or earning revenues from the production of hydrocarbons, fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. And there was this big push in the boardrooms to adopt Paris Accord alignment. And so you had multinational globalist oil and gas companies saying, "Oh yeah, we've got to sign on to the Paris Accords and we've got to commit to a date to be net zero." Well, Shell just kind of pulled back. Shell was one of the earlier adopters of net zero and signing on to the Paris Accords and virtue signaling. And now they're pulling back all those commitments because it's impossible. It's not going to happen. No company can do it. And really, the Paris Accords were meant for countries,
Mm.
not for
Rather
companies.
than
And
companies.
I've had a great conversation with Senator Mike Lee earlier this year and was talking about these companies that have signed on to the Paris Accords. And I feel like it's kind of treasonous. mean, you have an American company signing on to a foreign accord that hasn't been ratified by Congress. Imagine this happening in World War II. No, all of a sudden, XYZ company is going to sign on to a Japanese Kyoto Protocol.
Yeah,
I mean, they'd be called before Congress real quick.
absolutely.
I think they need to be called before Congress real quick right now. Why are you signing on to, foreign treaties that haven't been ratified by Congress? Why are you making these political commitments? And then, like what Senator Kennedy from Louisiana did, what does it do? I mean, he kept asking this DOE official during the Biden administration, so if we spend $50 trillion to reach net zero, what does it do?
Mm.
And the DOE official couldn't tell him because it doesn't do anything. He just says, oh, we're a major contributor of emissions. We're 13% of global emissions.
It's virtue signaling. There's
It,
nothing. It's just this facade. There's nothing behind it,
it is. Yeah, and
and
if you look
it's
at
an
every
empty shell.
yeah, and you look at every investor-owned, publicly traded utility in the United States, they all have net zero commitments. Most of them have signed on or made commitments to virtue signal that they're aligning with the Paris Accords, which again, I think that's treasonous. And there's been no accountability at the executive level for these companies, none. You look at what Ford and GM and Stellantis have done, all virtue signal they're going to be net zero, 100% electric. They've written off billions of dollars. You know who's lost that money? The pensioners that invested into those companies, hoping that their pensions would be more stable, that they'd be guaranteed a return on investment, but they completely abandoned fiduciary duty for virtue signaling. And I assure you that's the case with the utilities in Maine as well. They have virtue signaled they're going to be net zero. So what are they doing to do that? They're retiring coal and natural gas, replacing it with wind, solar, and batteries, incredibly expensive. They're unreliable. They're a parasite on the grid. It's essentially creating another grid, but they're more expensive. And so they
And
love
to
them
be
because they
fair,
get to pass
they're
those costs.
mandated to do so by state government.
Yes. And they,
And that's the policy piece, right? When you have states like Maine that are passing policies that demand
Mhm.
that we switch what we're using for energy, it's tying hands behind our backs.
Yeah, and if I was the leadership at one of those utility companies, every single bill we went out said that this is your bill is increasing because the legislature passed this bill. I would name the people that voted for it that are still in office. It gets a little bit political there, but
Yes.
they should put something on every single bill that lets people know that because of the people you've elected, we are required to do this, and your costs are going to go up accordingly.
Actually, Jason, I'll have to look this bill up. There was a legislative push to demand that they not label that piece on the bills so transparently, because currently it is.
Wow.
And so I'll have to touch base back with you on that. But that's the legislature and the governor's administration. They don't want the blame for this, and so they need a convenient scapegoat for their policies.
Sure. Absolutely, yeah, and they're all responsible. The utilities are responsible for not fighting back because I assure you, and the case of what happens in other states that I work in Texas, they won't show up and support or oppose policy that they know is going to reduce the cost of
Won't draw
consumer.
a hard line.
There's the
Right.
only people that are representing the consumers are elected officials like yourself.
Mhm.
There's just really not an advocacy organization. There are some, but they're not as strong as the utilities. They don't have the
No,
billions of dollars at their disposal, and they're not aligned with the climate alarmist movement to push a certain narrative.
absolutely. And here in Maine, we have the advocate, that's supposed to be the advocate for the people. But this is inherently still political position because it's appointed. And so
Mm.
the people really don't have an unbiased advocate.
Yeah, someone asked me earlier, how can people get better awareness of their electric and their utility costs? And I said, well, I wish it was like the signs at the gas station. You drive by all these advertisements, like maybe get the banks in the local area to put the price of a cost of a kilowatt of electricity and the cost of your natural gas at your home. That way people have this awareness. I wish they had big neon signs at their home or when they were using their water, how much this was costing. Every time they're using electricity, how much this was costing, just so they'd have better awareness into this. Because you get hit with a bill at the end of the month, and you're just like, ugh, ugh.
Well, I will tell you, the legislature did pass, and yeah, I think you'll know where I'm going with this, did pass a bill that's going to require education of low income folks to be more informed about what their usage is costing at different times of day. And so I think that's kind of a slope into telling you when you can use your electricity and spiking prices at different times of day. Your thoughts?
Yeah, there are these movements where you see some electric companies, these utilities offering free electricity during the middle of the night. So you're gonna actually gonna have to wake up at, midnight to start doing your laundry and washing your dishes, and then maybe go back to sleep for a couple of hours before, oh, I want to take a hot shower today. It's just really, it's this incredible social engineering when if they just had a market that rewarded reliability and affordability. You look at our electric utility companies and it's like, "Oh, we wanna be reliable and innovative." And I'm like, "Ooh, you're definitely reliable, but Texans are paying 28% more over the last 5 years for electricity." And it's these individual residential ratepayers and small businesses that bear the brunt of electric policy before anyone else because the major consumers, the industry, they do these things called power purchase agreements. And so they're prepaying for electricity. This is one of the reasons why we have so much wind and solar on our grid around the country is because these companies prepay for electricity and they're buying renewable energy credits so they can virtue signal they're
Yep.
100% renewable.
Yep.
And then a lot of them, even the data centers now are building natural gas on-site generation. It's off the
Mm.
grid, which I support that. There are some great policies out there that advocate for this. Bring your own power or consumer regulated electric utilities are a couple of the model policies that are out there that allow data centers or really a kind of a business park to bring their own generation and sell to a couple of users on that site. I
Yep.
think that's great. Off the grid, lower regulatory hurdles. We get things built faster. People don't have to pay for the transmission. You and I don't have to pay for the
Mhm.
transmission, which is good. But there
Well,
really needs to be some market reform.
I mean, we're going to get into data centers in a minute, but that's one of the arguments against data centers, right? Is the resources that they will require. And so that's an interesting piece of that. If they
Mhm.
can provide for their own needs, I think that takes one argument away. So, Jason, Maine just became the first state in the country to ban data centers over 20 megawatts. And your report dropped the same week that that legislation passed. And it showed 39 million, if I'm correct, in foreign funding behind that push, which seems to be tied to the left with this anti-data center movement. Can you walk us through what you uncovered?
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I was in the legislature a decade ago, I served on a small business economic development committee, and we were out there trying to lure data centers to Texas. We knew that these companies were going to build them a decade ago, and I'm in what was referred to as a priority groundwater management area, that district that I serve. So we have a little bit of surface water, we have a lot of groundwater that feeds the communities around here. And so there's just always this concern about groundwater availability. But we were bringing these data centers here, and it's the first thing we said, hey, if you've got access to water, that's really important. You're going to need to bring your own water, or you're going to secure rights to make sure that you're not degrading the water supply for the people that actually live and work in these communities.
Hence your giant dehumidifiers, right?
Yeah, bring in the dehumidifiers. Yes, because there's so much humidity here, especially in the Houston area. I mean, they, they put a little metal stick out and probably catch water. I mean, it's crazy. It's constantly 90% humidity.
Wow.
Um, so we were very successful in bringing these data centers to Texas. There's over 430 of them in Texas now, with 100 proposed. And it's like
Wow.
you've heard nothing over the last decade about all these data centers in Texas.
No.
I mean, nothing at all. And then
No.
all of a sudden, I start to see signs in my neighborhood that no data centers. And just recently, there was a story out of Indianapolis. A city council member in Indianapolis had voted to approve a data center. And all of a sudden, he gets 13 shots fired through his front door around midnight
Wow.
with a note stuck under his doormat that says, no data centers.
Wow.
And you look at who the city council man was, there are groups out there like Indivisible and 350, no, Indivisible and I think the Sierra Club had both named him personally in some social media posts.
Wow.
And Indivisible is one of these recipients, over $7 million of receiving foreign funding in opposition to data centers. And so
Mm.
you look, AI is the talk of the town right now. Everybody's talking
Mhm.
about AI. It kind of reminds me of the dot-com, boom and bust decade and a half, 2 decades ago
Yeah.
that we saw. We're kind of going up at that rate when it comes to AI. I mean, people are putting AI in their coffee. It's like, oh, yeah, this
Yeah.
coffee is made with AI. Oh, great, your stock value, of your company just went through the roof because you mentioned AI in a press release. I mean, there's a little bit of manipulation going on there, but everything is AI. And so I start to look at in my background before I got into the legislature in Texas. I mentioned I was in marketing, I was in sales, I worked for companies that provided software solutions and equipment to mostly trucking companies to improve their efficiency. So we were always looking for ways to reduce cost per mile to get goods to consumers more affordably, and we were doing this across all industries, and make their operations more safe. And you look at some of the impacts of AI, and what we've seen is now they're putting cameras on farming equipment, and those cameras are monitoring, and they're actually looking at the crops, and they're looking at what a weed is, and they can identify a weed within a millisecond and spray that weed with herbicide, where before you just put herbicide all
On
over
everything.
all of the crops. And
Yes.
now, so we've seen a 60 to 70% reduction in just the last couple of years in the use of herbicides, which
Wow.
I think is incredible. So we're not spraying good,
Mhm.
healthy food with a herbicide that doesn't need it. We want those crops to grow. So you just think about little efficiency gains like that that are possible because of data centers. Making fleets more efficient, reducing fuel consumption, lowering the cost per mile of trucking companies. Everything you and I are going to consume today at one
Absolutely.
point in time has been on or in a truck.
And Jason, people aren't thinking that far with AI, right? I think what the average, certainly Mainer, thinks about when they think about AI is ChatGPT and using it kind of like Google. Not thinking about crops and how we can increase production literally of the food that we're consuming in safer ways. And so I think part of that is simply not being aware, but then you got this foreign influence. And so Maine is making waves and making the news for really all the wrong reasons these days, including having the first data center ban. Um, do you do you see this national coordination showing up here in Maine? Do you think that that was part of the push to pass this legislation?
No, oh, absolutely. You look at some of the groups I've mentioned, you've got 350.org, which is a group of Tom Steyer, who's now running for governor of California, likely the next governor of California. This is an organization I believe he started. In You have Greenpeace, who just lost a lawsuit in North Dakota, which I love that they're actually being held accountable for some of the damages. Borders on domestic terrorism, but they were coordinating these efforts and found guilty in a court in North Dakota, ordered to initially pay over $600 million. Now they're paying $345 million. They say it's going to bankrupt them. Good riddance.
Darn.
Interestingly enough, they're suing Greenpeace in a EU court,
Hmm.
which Greenpeace is suing Energy Transfer, the company they lost their case to, in an EU court.
Okay.
Energy Transfer doesn't do business in the EU, which that's another topic we can talk about. But
Mm.
you've got all some of the Sierra Club I mentioned, Indivisible. Indivisible, I remember them coming really prominent, like 2018 election cycle, 2017. It was when Trump's first term. They all of us started going to really making these loud demonstrations. It's like they're hired actors. All the theater arts majors actually got employment for the first time in their careers. They were hired by these organizations like Indivisible to go out and act crazy and terrorize members of Congress. Just happened to only be Republicans. I remember this happened to my former Congressman Lamar Smith. They would show up at his office out in Kerrville, Texas, and scream and yell and threaten the people that worked there. I mean, it's very alarming. And then they would
Of
disrupt
course.
town halls. They've kind of continued their ways, but only more. Again, they're the highest recipient of some of these foreign funds from foreign billionaires. Ironically, Bernie can't be bought by billionaires except foreign ones. Um, I digress. But they're receiving these money from organizations that are really against affordable, reliable energy. And this is where
Mhm.
my work intersects with this. I'm like, wait a second, I'd never seen anything against data centers until now. So it's not a grassroots. It's not organic. It is a completely manipulated organization from foreign funded people that have been fighting against oil, gas, coal, and nuclear here in the United States,
Yeah,
advocating for Chinese wind and solar.
it's not organic when it's showing up coast to coast,
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
all at the same time.
Yeah, all the signs look the same. They're all printed by the same union shop. Yeah, with the same misspellings and the flag upside down, like we saw with Ukraine.
Mm.
Just silly stuff like that. But it is very coordinated effort, and people are being manipulated. Not that there aren't some concerns with data centers. There certainly are. But banning them, that helps no one in Maine.
Right.
I mean, the construction jobs, I mean, they should be, Maine should be embracing natural gas, building pipelines
Absolutely.
through Maine. I mean, the jobs that creates is incredible. I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
perfect examples of doing silly things and actually doing right things. And states like Texas and Louisiana and North Dakota have really done some right things and become environmental leaders at the same time because of the economic prosperity. And when you just ban things like pipelines, when you ban high pressure hydraulic fracturing, you're stealing people's private property rights, first of all, because someone owns the mineral rights on that land, which is really unique to the United States, which is, God bless our country, founding fathers giving us our private property rights. It's made a lot of people very wealthy, but having actually owning property is incredible. And when you make those bans and split people's private property rights, and to me, that's absolutely appalling.
Yeah, and I certainly made the argument when this bill was coming forward that our municipalities are perfectly able to determine if they want to have a data center. I'm sitting here today recording in Lewiston, Maine, and there was a data center proposed. Frankly, it was a bad deal tax wise. Um, Folks within the town spoke up. And it's not coming to Lewiston, and that is that municipality and those citizens' decision. Um, Rather than a blanket decision by the state of Maine. And we have this one town in particular. I think this legislation was pretty targeted. There's a number of towns that have these data centers proposed, but one town's really, really close to building and implementing, and that is the town of Jay. It's a former paper mill town, $500 million investment. And what do you say to the people of Jay when they've been counting on this economic boost to their town, which is really floundering, that now they have this moratorium and they are not able to pursue this avenue?
Oh gosh, you think about all the plumbers and the electrician and the tradespeople that
Mhm.
would be necessary to build this facility and then maintain it and upkeep it. I mean, it's just incredible economic driver, creates jobs. People want a place to store their photos, and you need more data centers to do that. As someone told me one time, people don't delete photos on their electric devices. Um, and guess what? That takes up storage. And so where's a good place to store it? In the cloud in some of these data centers. We want to win the race with AI. And just the farming example I gave is just one of the minor examples that are available that are being advanced because of AI. And there are other countries that don't want to see us win that race. They want us to continue to be dependent on them for goods. And apparently that's what Maine is doing. We want to be completely dependent on Chinese made,
Mhm.
heavily subsidized wind, solar, and batteries, which are extremely expensive, wind takes up 75 times the amount of land to produce an equivalent amount of electricity when the wind's blowing than natural gas or nuclear. Nuclear is the most dense form of energy on the face of the earth. And natural gas solar takes up about 25 times the amount of land of natural gas and wind. So if you're concerned about habitat, you'd be wanting to build natural gas, nuclear, and coal because as the left says, the greatest threat to endangered species is the loss of habitat. So we
Mhm.
be protecting habitat. But no, we're
Instead of
plowing
destructing it,
habitat over. What's that?
instead of just destroying habitat after habitat.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's really unfortunate.
You mentioned the space race. I feel like this is kind of similar here. The data center AI race. Um, Higher stakes than the space race. When you talk about the different things, again, we'll go back to the example of farming. That's incredible, what you can do with AI, and to kibosh an industry with foreign influence, seems incredibly short-sighted, and we don't wanna lose this race.
No, we really don't. And so what's going to happen is you're not going to have data centers built in Maine. You're going to have them built in a state next door. And then so the people that are in Maine are either going to move to those states next door because there's better economic opportunities, or they're going to watch as these other states do well compared to Maine and do better. And that's just really not good to be doing that. And so it is quite alarming. It just, gosh, there's just so many jobs when you make opportunities, when you have a reliable regulatory climate for businesses, the businesses will come. I like to use, there's an example, Guyana, a South American country, Guyana, it borders Venezuela. Uh, there was interesting, some Venezuela was starting to move troops before Maduro was arrested. The terrorist leader regime of Venezuela that's now in a prison in New York or in a jail in New York. He was actually moving in on Guyana. Guyana had been producing oil and gas off the coast, and their wealth was astronomical. They were embracing the production of energy in their country off their shore by responsible energy producers, and it was resulting in just a transformation almost overnight. Grocery
Wow.
stores, bare shelves within a matter of weeks. It's almost like they were completely stocked and they had selection. I remember reading this Wall Street Journal article years ago with photos of what the grocery store, and I'm like, "Oh, that looks like a really high-end Whole Foods that I
Mm,
bet you'd see in a large metropolitan city." And no, it's a grocery store in Guyana that actually has
wow.
has things on the shelves. And this is a country that was impoverished, and
Mhm.
then because of this embracing of responsible energy production, they're now not impoverished, and doing quite well. And you have a lot of companies that are getting rid of other assets so that they can go produce and drill and produce oil and gas off the shore of Guyana because it's a predictable regulatory climate. They're not going to get attacked. And so
Mm.
they're packing up and putting up operations in other places where it's not a predictable regulatory climate and going to where it is.
Absolutely, and I think that that state to state comparison is so apt when you look at one area that's restricting and another that's not, and that flourishing. We often use the comparison of Maine and New Hampshire, although I am growing increasingly concerned about doing that because my motivation is to say, "Hey, look what we could do in Maine and increase our flourishing." I don't want to chase people off to move to New Hampshire. I want to improve our state in that model.
Yeah, I'm a little upset because the American Legislative Exchange Council just came out with their energy affordability index, and it
Mhm.
had Texas at 10th, and I'm
Oh
like,
man.
"Oh, that hurts." And it's like, "Oh gosh." And then North Dakota was number 1, Louisiana was number
Yeah.
2, and there's Texas at 10. And people were actually bragging about like, "Hey, we came in the top 10." I'm like, "That's not good. We should be like number 1. We should set the bar. We produce more oil and gas than any other state in the country. The U.S. is now the world's largest producer of oil and gas, mostly thanks to Texas. We've actually exceeded both Saudi Arabia and Russia combined in the production of oil and gas. We're exporting energy around the world, lifting the world's poor out of poverty, but we're 10th on affordability. And it's because we're number 1 in wind, we're number 1 in
Yep.
solar, we're number 1 in batteries, and those are incredibly expensive, and our
Yes.
ratepayers are feeling the pain. Florida has lower residential electricity prices than Texas does, and
Ouch.
Florida doesn't produce any oil and gas. I'm like, that should
Yeah.
never be the case.
Oh, that's gotta hurt.
So,
What
and I
number
don't
what
know where
number is
Maine is
Florida?
on the
Well,
list. Have you
Maine
looked?
is off the charts bottom, I'm sure. We had the highest year-over-year increase to our electricity costs, 36%
Oh,
24 to
that's
25. Connecticut was the next closest at 18%. But I'm feeling some competition between, you Texans and Florida coming up to improve policies to bump your number above theirs. Where are
yes,
they currently?
yeah, yeah. Gosh, it's funny because I remember I was talking to an oil and gas services company, and he was talking about sustainability. And I was bragging on a multinational company that's based in Houston because they're the only multinational global company that is publicly traded that doesn't have any Paris commitments, that doesn't have any net zero commitments. They're like, no, we don't do political agendas. We produce oil and gas. We do it more responsibly than anywhere else on the planet. And I'm like, oh, I love it. So I was bragging on this company, and this services company guy called me and he goes, I thought you said that, this company didn't have, all this virtue signaling and political agendas. And I said, they don't. And he goes, well, I just got a phone call from them and they asked what my sustainability plan was. And I was
Oh.
like, you're kidding. And I go, what'd you tell him? And he goes, I told him to remain profitable. And I'm like, I love it.
Yes.
I'm using that because guess what? If you're not sustainable. And I said, so what
Mhm.
was the response from this company? And he said, it checked a box. We have a plan. It's to remain profitable. That's all they needed to know is that we had a plan. And so when
Okay.
you're having 36% increases
Mhm.
in electricity, that's not sustainable.
Of
And so I
course
think we
not.
need to look at sustainability a little bit different. Like, is it sustainable
Mhm.
for mankind? And
Mhm.
that is not sustainable. Texas at 28% over 5 years is not sustainable. Look at what's happened in Germany, deindustrializing right before their eyes. They have the most expensive electricity on the planet. They had this German word for energy transition that they bragged about. And what are they doing? I mean, they're BASF, world leading chemical manufacturing company, is shutting down operations in Germany. I mean, this employs thousands of people. They're German-based company, shutting down operations in Germany, citing high energy costs, moving operations to China. Who cares about the environment or human rights in China? They certainly don't. I
No.
mean, it's just appalling. You look at BMW, their largest manufacturing facility. There's a German automobile manufacturer, their largest manufacturing facility, South Carolina. Oh,
Mhm.
gosh. And Mercedes just announced that they were shutting down some operations in Germany because of high energy costs. The same thing is happening in the United Kingdom. I mean, the United Kingdom is just like they had this power plant called Drax. It was this coal-fired power plant, produced electricity right in England. But because of virtue signaling, they had to decommission it from using coal to power their electricity. So what do they do now? They actually import pressed wood pellets from the southeastern United States. So it's basically biomass, wood mass. It's basically garbage. But probably not now because they're paying a high price for it. But they call it renewable. So they're burning wood that's
Okay.
imported on a ship that's shipped across the ocean, burning bunker fuel that if you're concerned about CO2 emissions, I'm not. Again, I'm the carbon king. I like high carbon lifestyle. I'd love it to have a good Topo Chico. It's the really high carbonated beverage. It's got higher concentrations of CO2 than what's in the atmosphere.
Thoroughly Carbon King.
I love it. Um, yeah, so then they burn wood pellets that emit twice the CO2 as the coal they were burning before, and it's like it just that kind of absurdity is just ludicrous. But
Mhm.
because of the pollution control technology that we use when we burn coal here in the United States, we actually capture the bad stuff before it makes it into the air. We didn't do this 50 years ago. And actually our air quality, we had a lot of smog in certain municipalities, in certain cities, Los Angeles, Denver, a lot of pollution. That's gone now. I mean, the only pollution in Asia, the only pollution in Southern California right now is Asian air pollution. But this is how they virtue signal. And the UK and Germany are deindustrializing. And I certainly don't want to see that happen in Maine. I don't want to see it happen in Texas. But that's what happens when you have energy that's neither affordable nor reliable, is you see deindustrialization. And believe me, that's what China wants more than anything. They don't want us to have data centers. They don't want us to have the power to power data centers because they want to win on that front so that we're even more dependent on China than we are now.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the bottom line. Shame on us for giving into that agenda. Um, Thankfully, the moratorium that we just passed, I believe, has a sunset. So this will be a conversation we have to revisit, but that doesn't fix things for Jay and these other towns that were set to move forward, where these projects are now not going to happen, and as a result, we are going to be lacking those jobs, the permanent infrastructure that will guarantee jobs for the long term, and it is certainly the opposite of human thriving when we're so restrictive and unable to expand our options here in Maine.
Yeah. Well, I pulled up the ALEC energy affordability rankings that they just came out with a couple weeks ago, and Maine is 42nd.
I am only shocked that we're not 50th.
Oh gosh, yeah. I think California is 50th, or maybe it was Hawaii. One of those two states. Again, states that support the Green New Deal that want to ban the use of fossil fuels. Katie Porter, who's running for governor in California, was just like, one of the reasons why our fuel is more expensive is because we have a low carbon fuel standard. And I'm like, thanks for the sound clip. And then she goes, and then she's like, and Californians can be grateful that we have cleaner air. And I'm like, okay, you're talking about carbon dioxide. Like, what color is it? What's it taste like? What's it smell like? I mean, it has absolutely nothing to do with cleanliness, but there are people that have been manipulated into believing this. Like, wait a second, we just don't have critical thinkers today. And I admit that I was not one of them 10 or 15 years ago thinking, oh yeah, if we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that's got to be good. But no, it's not. We've reduced pollution, greenhouse gas emissions necessary for life on Earth. We can't conflate the two. Reducing the emission of pollutants is a good thing. Worrying about greenhouse gas emissions is absolutely absurd. That's why I'm grateful for the Trump administration, their efforts to roll back the endangerment finding, which was put in 2009 by the Obama administration. The deep state there at the EPA said, oh, this is a danger to human health and the environment, and it is neither. It's necessary for life on Earth. Maybe that's why they think it's a danger. But
We heard a lot of
California.
shrieking over that one up here in Maine
Oh, absolutely.
from both
Oh,
of
I'm
us.
sure. I'm sure. While they're sitting there drinking their Perrier and, like I said, ingesting higher concentrations of CO2, they're like, "Oh, we've got to get rid of CO2." Um, it's just, I mean, it really is. It's plant food. It's 0.04% of our atmosphere and necessary for life on Earth. And I think that's where I'm like, that's what it is. It's necessary for life on Earth and human flourishing. And you start to look at the left and some of their anti-life measures. They're very Malthusian. They think there's too many of us on this planet. I couldn't disagree more.
Jason, Maine's attorney general joined a multi-state suit against the big oil companies in 2024, and your organization has been tracking the national movement on this, the infrastructure behind these lawsuits. So, what can you tell me about that? We've talked about the playbook that Maine is in regarding the data centers, but are we seeing a similar thing here?
Yeah, we really are. It's this coordinated effort, and a lot of the same groups are involved. I broke some research a couple of years ago from the Environmental Law Institute that since 2018, they have been running this thing called the Climate Judiciary Project, where they have 13 training modules, training loosely, to educate judges, both the local, federal, and state levels around the country. They've had over 50 junkets where they brought in over 2,000 judges to
Wow.
wine them and dine them and train them about highly debatable and questionable so-called climate science. There's groups like Snopes have completely debunked some of the information. Snopes, this left-leaning fact check organization, has said that this stuff is not credible. But yet they continue to use this to train judges.
Wow.
So this is quite alarmism. It's resulted in a few different congressional investigations. Senator Cruz, Oversight Committee, Comer. I think the Uthmeyer, the Attorney General for Florida, just this week announced that they were investigating this. Jim Jordan, his committee in the House, the Judicial Committee, Oversight Committee, is investigating the Environmental Law Institute, and their ties. Basically, we want to see what information has been shared with some of these judges, and how is this actually training judges and not tainting judges before cases are even brought to their court? And that's really what it is. It's quite alarming. And then, so I just couldn't believe this when we started pulling this research back and stuff that they had on their website. They were just boasting about how they're out there corrupting judges. They're not using that term, I am,
Sure.
but that's what they were doing. And then it comes to find out that there's this alignment with the Federal Judicial Center, which is a taxpayer-funded, government-chartered organization of the judiciary. They had actually hosted one of ththese Climate Judiciary Project events. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Chief Justice John
Wow.
Roberts oversees the Federal Judicial Center and his role as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I'm like, wow, they should be doing absolutely nothing with the Climate Judiciary Project from the Environmental Law Institute. Just
I mean,
mind-boggling to me.
it is mind-boggling, Jason, and I think about it from perspective of, I mean, when you look at the three branches of government and the judiciary's responsibility to interpret law, when you introduce a bias like this, um, that is incredibly alarming and dangerous. And it makes me wonder what other areas, we should be looking at. But let's, of course, stick to energy today. Um, what is or could be done about this at this point?
Well, I think the congressional investigations are proceeding now. I've just been privy to some of the emails that have gone back and forth between judges and the organizers of these junkets, if you will, taking them out to nice resorts and wining and dining them, something that you would never expect to happen in the judiciary. I mean, we hear about lobbying for members of Congress
You hear about it for legislators or
yes,
Congress, et
absolutely.
cetera, and you're like, "Oh, that's pretty gross."
Yeah, yeah, it is. But then you think the judiciary? Wait, wait, wait.
Yeah.
This is happening too. They've been corrupted too, and they really have. So just continuing to look into this, find out that on December 31st of 2025, New Year's Eve, I'm sure you were hard at work, doing bill analysis and working on model
Oh,
policy,
I'm sure.
and publishing 2,000-page plus manuals on what your legislative agenda was going to be. But that's what the Federal Judicial Center did. They published an over 2,000-page training manual on New Year's Eve. And it's like, oh, that's when you publish something you don't want anybody to see. You don't want anybody to be aware of
Nobody's
this.
paying attention.
Yeah, no
No
one's paying
one's paying
attention. The
attention.
media has checked out for at least another 6 or 7 days. The AGs aren't
Absolutely.
gonna be looking at this. The Carbon King is not gonna catch this one. Well, some attorneys general did catch this, and within a matter of weeks through, I believe it was Montana's AG Knudsen is his name. He sent a letter with a bunch of his peers around the country asking the Federal Judicial Center who published this manual. The manual was written by the National Academies. Their National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine,
Yep.
They've been around since 1863, started by Abraham Lincoln's administration.
Wow.
Well-known, well-respected
Mhm.
research institute that does research for federal agencies, Department of Transportation, EPA, basically every cabinet level of bureaucracy uses the national academies to conduct research.
Yep.
You think it would also be impartial.
You would think.
You would
But
think.
I'm hearing that we're gonna hear that that's the exact opposite.
Yeah, they published this climate science chapter, reference materials that are in the Climate Judiciary Project, these materials that have been debunked, these theories about, oh, we can go back to 1904 and tell the carbon emissions from this particular business operations resulted in this storm 115 years later, so that company should pay. I mean,
That's crazy.
it's literally stuff like that,
Mhm.
not serious whatsoever, been completely debunked. But they're training this. So there's really highly debatable climate science chapter. There are people that are referenced in this that was not disclosed
Mhm.
in the manual. They're of counsel of law firms. Scherer Edling, namely, Scherer Edling is the law firm in San Francisco that's the most prominent firm suing energy companies. They're representing states and municipalities, free of charge, of course.
Of course. How
And
kind.
3 lawsuits were just dismissed out of Maryland a couple of weeks ago. Sheridling was the attorney, but there's one of their of counsels. He's a professor at Columbia, but he's of counsel of Sheridling is writing the training manual to train federal judges on climate science. So
Mhm.
here's someone who has a vested interest in the outcome of these cases is writing training manuals for thousands of federal judges. So the AG sent a letter to the Federal Judicial Center, the executive director, saying you need to get rid of this climate science chapter.
Mhm.
And for me, that wasn't far enough. I wish they'd,
Mhm.
talked to me before they sent this letter in because I would have said you need to rescind the entire fourth edition 2,000 plus page manual.
Mhm.
So the Federal Judicial Center responded and said we're going to omit the climate science chapter from their website. The national academies still host a full manual, even though there's numerous conflicts that we disclose on our report at AmericanEnergyInstitute.com. You can see it there. There's numerous conflicts. And so
Okay, but this is starting to make so much more sense to me now, Jason, because then from the legislative perspective, we had a bill before us in the Maine Legislature that said Maine is going to have a super fund where these companies who have been poisoning our environment for such a long time are going to have to pay in, and it would be retroactive to 1995. And so if there are states like Maine trying to pass bills like this, which ended up passing as a, resolve or a study rather than an actual super fund at this point, right? Little creep in, right?
Mhm.
If states are going to pass legislation like this, these kinds of bills, these laws are going to be challenged in the courts. And what do you need? You need courts that are biased towards allowing this kind of policy to stand.
Yeah, right. It's like, oh, wait, give us a couple more years. Just do a study now because we need to spend a
Yep.
couple more years whining and dining the judges whose courts that this will go before. We need a new administration in DC. But Vermont and New York have already passed these super funds. Minnesota's considering one right now. I've been writing about that, and they're just appalling. We need a state, and I've tried to make this happen in Texas, and we'll come back again. And actually, we've got this as an interim charge. So Texas meets every other year. We meet in odd numbered years. So we're in the interim right now. Our interim's a little bit longer if we don't have special sessions. There's a direct correlation to the state's, inverse correlation to how often your legislators meet and the success of a state. So
Mm.
if you can convince Maine to go every other year and meet for 100, 140 days,
Yes,
you'd be a big hero to the people because there'd be
absolutely.
less time for what they can do to you
Hmm.
as opposed to what they do for you as a public servant.
For sure.
But we'll have interim hearings in Texas, but we really need Texas to pass a law to create a conflict that, hey, our Texas companies aren't going to be subject to other states overburdensome regulations. They're not going to be subject to EU regulations. And if they comply with those regulations, then they're violating state law. Now, if there's any kind of fine or penalty, that's a topic for discussion. But you really need a law to pass that says that state-based companies based in the state of Texas can't comply with other states' overburdensome regulations that
Mhm.
exceed federal or Texas law. Then you create this conflict about extraterritorial overreach. States like California, what they're doing now and mandating companies so comply with emissions reporting requirements everywhere they do business, not just in the state of California. That's way outside of their jurisdictional boundaries, but they're imposing these regulations on businesses. And so ratepayers and energy consumers in Texas and every other country and every other state are paying higher cost of energy because of California law.
Well, passing good policy that says we're not going to comply with other states' ridiculous regulations is only going to be more of a draw to businesses to make their home in Texas and other states that pass common sense policy like that.
Yeah, I just had something published today in Fox News about all the businesses that are relocating to Texas because you've got a predictable regulatory climate, and we're just not crazy about all the lawsuit abuse that other states seem to be. So we're going to continue to see more and more businesses relocate to Texas for that very reason. But yes, pushing back on EU regulations, California regulations, and these super funds, which do nothing but increase the cost. It's how you fund pet projects and tax everyone. And ultimately, it's the least among us that bear that burden more than anyone else. The increasing
Well,
cost of electricity, it hurts the poor and the least among us more than
I mean,
anyone.
and that has to be the main point, right? We talking about, the judiciary and what's getting passed in the legislature, but the bottom line is these policies, these bills, these judges' decisions are impacting everyday Mainers, folks across the country in really huge ways that I think most people aren't aware of. But these decisions made at very high levels are impacting what folks pay every month on their bills, and not just their electricity bills, but when you consider that we're trucking in so much of our food here in Maine, every aspect of our lives is driven by these policies passed, yes, in DC, but more than that, passed in Augusta. And the more harmful policies that are overly restrictive and burdensome, the more our costs are going up.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And they should be going down, especially energy costs should be going down. If people embraced and supported the building of more energy infrastructure, more pipelines, more refineries, the first refinery is under construction right now. It's the first refinery in 50 years in the United States. And it's being built in South Texas in Brownsville. It's called the America First Refinery, which is great. I love it. But wait, we're building a new refinery for the first time in 50 years. California has gone from 40 refineries to 8 on their way to 6. They're looking to Vietnam to import their gasoline because no one will make it and can comply affordably with
And yet we
California's
complain
over.
about our high prices.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like you're cutting off the source of those goods, but then you're going to complain about the repercussions when you can't source them locally anymore.
Mhm.
Just really kind of disheartening. But we need to expand our refining capacity. We need to be building more reliable, affordable electric generation to power industry. Bring that industry back here. Everyone will benefit, and we'll continue our environmental leadership.
I think that the powers that be are able to get away with so much that they of what they do because folks are focused on just getting through life, right? Living life, going to work, dealing with whatever family struggles may be coming up, medical issues. Like you're just living life, and so the powers that be, they can skirt through and slip through a lot of these policies. Um, we have a lot coming at us. We've never been as inundated with information as we are now. What would you say to people? What's your kind of top line message to folks to understand how these policies and issues really are affecting us so drastically and what we should be doing about that?
Well, it's one of the things when I was in the office, we have a program called Page for a Day where you can basically bring in a young person. I think it's between the ages of like 7 and 17 and spend the day at the Capitol with you and kind of shadow you and kind of get to see things up close and personal. And so I started this Young Women in Leadership program where I would bring girls that were in any of the schools. It could be homeschool, private school, public school. We took applications of people that might be interested in government at some point in time or interested in running for office or interested in law to spend the day with me. And so we would look through and find those that we thought, probably weren't some activists that were going to cause them to come and make a scene and that were actually going to be good students, if you will, and spend the day with them. And at the end of the day, they'd go to committee with me. I actually sit in my desk on the House floor and cast votes for me based on my recommendations, of course.
Okay.
But we're allowed to do that kind of thing here in Texas. and really kind of open their eyes to the process. And then it would bring their parents, because then their parents would come and sit in the gallery and watch their child basically legislating for a day. And it just really exposed people to more of an opportunity to be involved in the process and understand how the process goes. And I was fortunate; I represented a district that was very close to the Capitol, and I would tell our constituents and people in the community, like, you have an opportunity to have a much louder voice than someone, let's say, from Lubbock or Amarillo, which are 6 and 7 hours drive away, or El Paso, which is similar.
Mhm.
They're 1,000 miles away. You can have a really a more impactful voice than people around the state because you live geographically close. So
Mhm.
follow the policies that are going on that interest you. But having the young people there was great, because I'd love to visit with them afterwards. And some of them, I was like, "So what do you think? Did you enjoy this? Do you think you want to study political science? Do you have a desire to go into run for office sometime in the future?" And some of them would just flat out just be like, "No, that was awful. Like, I don't ever want to do that again." And I'm like, "Well, congratulations." And I'd have this really positive reaction to them, and they're like, "Wait, why are you happy?" And I'm like, "I'm happy for you, because now you know what you don't want to do. That's one thing that you can cross off your list. And so you don't get stuck in a career or, something that you may hate and then do a bad job at." And we certainly don't want those people serving in any levels of government. So, I was happy for them. And there were some that did want to get involved, and I would kind of, still mentor some of them to this day, and try to create opportunities for them. But I just think, as elected officials, we need to go out and encourage people to get involved in the process, and go out and just visit with them as much as possible. When Indivisible, this climate alarmist group, but I say climate alarmist, they're really just an alarmist organization, activist organization. When they were barnstorming town halls, I stopped doing town halls and had meet and eats, where I would go to a restaurant with the restaurant's approval and say, "Hey, we want to come in. What are your slowest hours?" And they would say, "Oh, between 2 and 5 p.m., or between 9 and 11:30 a.m." I'm like, "Okay,
Mhm.
do you mind if I have an event during some of those hours? People are going to buy food. I'm going to buy some food." And they would be like, "Absolutely. You're wanting to do an event here?" And I'm going to just go table to table and sit down with my constituents for 7 to 10 minutes at each table. And it was so funny, because the protesters would show up, and they're like, "Are you gonna get up and speak?" And I'm like, "No, I'm gonna come to each table, and I'm gonna talk music with you." And they were just completely disarmed and so friendly and so nice. And then I'd see some pictures on social media afterwards, and it was like holding up their posters like, "We gave it to Jason." And I was like, "Really?" Like, we had coffee together. It was really nice and pleasant. But I guess you've got to embellish, about the fish you caught on Facebook and do it. But I think it's important that, as elected officials, we get out and visit with the people that we serve and work for, and encourage them to get involved. I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea of the engagement at a young age,
Yes.
and involving the whole family. And I think sometimes I can think about, here at Lead Maine, we want to educate and empower and engage Mainers to make the change we want to see in our state, and that can feel like a really big thing. But when you break it down to the individual level, those individual kids and their families that you interacted with, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a
Yeah,
time.
right.
And that is making such an impact in those families. And I'm hopeful for our future as we get more and more of our citizens engaged that way.
Yeah, I'm hopeful too. I'm optimistic, especially some of the young people that I get to interact with and visit with. I'm a little concerned about the face in the screens, and
Yes.
I'm hearing more and more about people that are young and college students that are going to flip phones. They're buying digital cameras or disposable cameras and taking those out instead. I'm like, that's so refreshing to hear. Like, they're becoming self-aware that they're doing this all the time, and want to be aware of their surroundings. So I'm grateful that there's some people that are going back to old school technology, if you will, so they can actually enjoy their surroundings and visit with other people, because that's important for just growth.
It absolutely is. Our teenagers share a flip phone. They're going to be mortified that I've now disclosed
I
this.
love it.
But they don't have their faces buried in a screen. And one of their
Good
friends came
job.
over recently and pulled out his phone, and it was a flip phone. And I said, "Look, guys, you are not
Yes.
the only ones with a flip phone. Your friend has a flip phone, so now it can be cool."
Yeah, and show you how to text.
I know. My kids have got some really fast thumbs.
Oh, that's
Oh.
great. Well, good job. Well done on that.
Jason, tell me a little bit about what your actions have been in response to these findings with the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and the actions that you guys are taking.
Yeah, we're quite alarmed by the partnership with the Federal Judicial Center. The Federal Judicial Center is a government chartered organization, 100% taxpayer funded. The National Academies, this organization, been around since 1863, receives in 2024, they received about 74% of their funding from taxpayers, over $200 million. And
Wow.
yet they write this completely alarmist manual. They own the copyright on the training manual. It's called the Reference Manual on Scientific Evidence, fourth edition. This is the one that was published December 31st, 2025. We've asked the Federal Judicial Center, we've asked members of Congress to call on the Federal Judicial Center to completely rescind, not omit a portion, but completely rescind the fourth edition, go back to the third edition. We shouldn't have judges being trained with
Mhm.
information from the national academies like this. The national academies, even if you pull the climate science chapter out, they still reference people like Michael Mann. He's a court sanctioned person, sanctioned by a court for providing false information to juries. Some people call that lying. He's been
Yes.
sanctioned by a court providing false information to juries. This is the last person we want training federal judges. But
Training
yet he
federal
is still
judges,
referenced in the manual.
and Jason, this is want to remind folks on the taxpayer dime. So
Yes.
this is not an independent organization that is, raising all of their own funds and then doing this on their own time. We're talking about a taxpayer-funded org that is then producing this biased information and pushing this out to try to push an agenda.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're trying to do. There's more reports that are coming out about the National Academy's involvement in DEI. So I'm just made privy to some research by another organization about national academies and their efforts there to push these Marxist agendas
Mhm.
through education, which is just mm, infuriating
Alarming.
to me. But you look at
Yes.
some of their funding. I'm waiting for one of the cabinet members to say, we're done with the national academies. In 2024, the Department of Transportation, Secretary Duffy, he was not the secretary then, $84 million to the national academies. Department of Defense, now the Department of War, $33 million. Health and Human Services, $23 million. Department of Energy, $7 million. Department of Veterans Affairs, $4.5 million to national academies. I'm sure there's a lot of veterans in Maine that would be furious to know
Absolutely.
that tax dollars are funding efforts that are anti-American. And
Mhm.
that's exactly what their climate alarmist movement is. So you look at every single cabinet level, and I'm waiting like who's going to be the most MAGA cabinet member and say, we're done with the national academies. We actually want science, not political agendas driving our agenda, because they do. They need research to be done. I mean, there's requirements in statute that they conduct certain research. You certainly don't want the national academies doing it. You look at the leadership of the national academies. Again,
Mhm.
almost 74% funded with taxpayer dollars. They're making over seven figures. So
Wow.
that's $1 million. They're
I mean,
making
this kind of
over.
sounds to me like we've got like multiple arms of the octopus to cut off here.
Yeah, we really do. I mean, $1 million, and so they make a lot of contributions. When you make $1 million, I guess you could afford to make a lot of contributions to political parties and to political candidates.
Mhm.
Just happens to be most, if not all of theirs are on the left. They're
Mhm.
supporting Democrats. So this is almost like a Democrat money laundering machine. Let's give a ton of money to the national academies from government agencies. Let's pay their leaders millions of dollars, and let's have those leaders return the money back to the Democrats that are putting this funding in place. They're also receiving money from other Chinese Communist Party aligned organizations, Arabella Networks and other networks.
Yep.
Again, we disclose this on our report, AmericanEnergyInstitute.com. It talks about all this left money, this dark money, which I think Bernie Sanders said something against dark money earlier this week, and I love seeing the signs in my neighborhood that
Selective,
no data centers.
selectively against dark money,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. The signs like no data centers and just happens to be in the same yard. Bernie can't be bought by billionaires. Whew, and it's these billionaires that are funding the climate alarmist movement that are buying Bernie, who's opposing dark money, and it's these dark money organizations that are funding the efforts. So I encourage people to check out that report.
Yeah,
It's
where can folks find that, Jason?
yeah, again, AmericanEnergyInstitute.com. Check under resources, and you'll see all of our reports. AmericanEnergyInstitute.com. Look at resources, and you'll see this report called "Captured Courts: The National Academies, the Federal Judicial Center, and Climate Lawfare." Just incredible, unfortunate corruption of our judiciary.
But not surprising. We see this same model, this money laundering scheme running both at the federal level, but also at the state level. We see this here in Maine with the nonprofits that get funding, and then Planned Parenthood is a great example of that. Planned Parenthood gets state taxpayer funding, and then an arm of Planned Parenthood supports Democrat candidates for the legislature. Just endorsed Janet Mills after she gave them $2.25 million in the supplemental budget. It's this same model of money flowing to keep the power structure in place, to keep those tax dollars going to these orgs, who then help push an agenda across our state. So it doesn't surprise me in the least.
Yeah, I'm still optimistic and hopeful because Doge exposed a lot of this in the first few months of the administration, the millions of dollars, and we even discovered that the Environmental Protection Agency had given a couple $100,000 to the Environmental Law Institute. And so there have been letters that have been sent to Administrator Zeldin, who I think is the best EPA administrator we've ever had, to basically rescind that money. Like no longer give money to the Environmental Law Institute that is making his life harder, that is making energy more expensive and harder for Americans. That we've got to stop this movement. And one way to do it is to cut off the federal funding. And lots of that has been cut off. Now you've got these Swiss billionaires and United Kingdom funds that are controlled by billionaires dumping millions in to fight data centers, dumping in millions to fight affordable, reliable energy, primarily natural gas, coal, and nuclear. And we're exposing them. And that's what we're trying to do and visiting with lawmakers like yourself at the state and federal level to raise their awareness of this and hopefully trigger investigations not only at the state level, but the federal level.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for your work there, Jason. Your podcast tagline says that there are no wealthy, low energy nations. What does that mean in practice? And what does that mean for a state like Maine when we get it backwards?
Yeah, and I share this chart. I've got a couple of different charts, one that shows CO2 emissions and then another one that shows energy, and the poor countries don't use any energy. They're in energy poverty. The wealthy countries use a lot of energy and coincidentally have high CO2 emissions. That's why I love the high carbon lifestyle. There's a perfect example. My son asked me a few years ago, he's like, has there ever been an example of where net zero was tried? Like a really good example. And I said, as a matter of fact, yes. And he's like, well, tell me about it. I said, Sri Lanka. You had a guy run for president in 2019, gets elected. He says he's the first ever net zero candidate on the face of the earth. And at that point in time, Sri Lanka was exporting tea. They were exporting rice. Compared to their Southeast Asian neighbors, they were exceeding their level of prosperity. I mean, there's no level near our level of prosperity here in the United States, but they were experiencing human flourishing. They're rising above their neighbors. And that's what happens when you export goods. When you start to export goods, you start to do really well. You're bringing other people's money into your country. And this guy ran as the first ever net zero candidate on the face of the earth, and he gets elected and immediately implements this policy that we're going to ban the use and importation of nitrogen-based fertilizers. That's from natural gas. That's dense energy. And so what happened? Food production dropped 40% in 1 year. This is 1 year,
Wow.
one policy, one elected official. That's all it took. And in 1 year, food production went down 40%, cost went up 80%. At the end of that year, 9 in 10 people in Sri Lanka were suffering from hunger, facing hunger on a daily basis. I mean, this was unheard of just a year and a half earlier. His palace was ultimately overrun by Sri Lankans, and he fled. And he fled in a jet-fueled military cargo plane. I mean, it wasn't solar or wind powered.
Rules for thee, not for me.
Yeah, he wasn't sailing
Especially
with
when my life is
Greta.
on the line.
Yeah, he's flying away in a military cargo plane. And I kept thinking he needs to go to Malawi. Like Malawi lives at net zero. That's this panacea, according to the climate left. I mean, Bill Gates and Antonio Gutierrez and Klaus Schwab, John Kerry, Al Gore. I mean, all these people should live in Malawi. That's net zero. I mean, that's where they should live. This is their Eden. No, he went to
Live in Malawi with the Malawi standard of living,
exactly.
to be clear.
Yeah, where women walk countless hours a day
Yes.
to collect water.
Go walk to get your water.
Yeah, it's appalling. I've got videos of that. But no, he went to Singapore, which just happens to be the highest per capita CO2 emissions on the planet. I'm like, he wants the high carbon lifestyle. He's going to Singapore. I get it. I've been there. I visited, I think it was 2016, maybe it was 18. It was a lot like Houston. It's basically on the same level, a lot of humidity, but beautiful, just lush, green. Everything was clean. I really enjoyed it. Their water plant is called Renew. They actually retreat their wastewater. Other people call it toilet to tap, but that's essentially what they're doing. And it takes a lot of energy to clean water, to make it potable, to get out of a tap. It's not something that you just walk down to a creek and you pull it out. That's dangerous, and that's how most people live on the planet.
Well, doesn't this just illustrate the hypocrisy? The people who have these extreme stances, it's never actually a principle that they stand on, but it's the virtue signaling. It's so empty and shallow that once it faces a challenge, there's nothing there.
Yeah, it's they want to ban coal, but yet they're drinking water that's been through a charcoal filtered process to clean that water. But yes, there is just so much hypocrisy from the left, and I think it's a religion. And it's unfortunate that they don't have the same faith and the same savior that I do. They believe in something quite different, and it's really unfortunate for them.
You know, in a state like Maine and so many others, we have a citizen legislature. We are not energy experts. I'm a nurse, I'm a mom, I'm a business owner. And so, how do we best go about educating Maine's elected officials to have a higher energy IQ and to be able to tell the true from the false? And what is the empty virtue signaling and what is good policy? What tips do you have for communicating about it?
I guess invite me to come to Maine, and I'd love to visit with some of your colleagues, and I'll
Open
talk to
invitation.
I would love to come and visit with some of your colleagues on the left or the right. I'm
Mhm.
happy to do that, and just talk to them about the importance and the affordability, the importance of affordable and reliable energy. And that's
Or
the
how
term
about a
I keep using
debate?
because it used to be all of the above. And I was
Yeah.
guilty of doing this. Oh, I'm on all of the above. And it's like, wait a second. I realize that some of those that are in the all of the above category are heavily dependent on taxpayer subsidies, which
Hmm.
increase taxpayers' burdens. It's just taking dollars out of another pocket and increasing the cost of electricity at the same time. They're heavily dependent on a Chinese supply chain. I'm like, wait a second. I'm for affordable and reliable. I made that move, gosh, probably 8 years ago. Been working with the current administration during their first administration and now during their second to talk about that. And it's great because that's all they talk about: affordable, reliable, resilient American energy. So had some success on that front. But
Well, I see a debate invitation in our future, Jason. We're
I
gonna
would love that. I would absolutely love that. I go speaking events all over the country. I get heckled, and I really I don't mind. I love when people charge the stage and wanna have a debate with me because I'll actually engage with them and have a peaceful debate while the event organizers are panicking and coming out from behind curtains like, "What's going on here?" And I'm having a little bit of
security.
fun. Yeah, yeah. Um so I enjoy that, but I would love to come up there and have a debate, have a conversation, and just visit with people. And I encourage people to travel. And it's something I've told my boys growing up that time travel exists. And the first time I told them, they're just like, "What?" And I'm like, "It's just called travel." I mean, we can go to places, and I will try to take you to some of these places, like how we lived 100 years ago, how we lived 150 years ago, how we lived 200 years ago,
Mhm.
and you can see those places around the world. And I've had the opportunity to visit some of those places in Myanmar and Sri Lanka, not Sri Lanka, Singapore, which is how we'll probably be living in 10 years, but the Philippines, Egypt and Tunisia. And in Egypt, I joked that I was thankful for the Environmental Protection Agency, and I said, "Don't everybody tell anybody, but I'm kind of thankful we have an EPA in the U.S." Yeah, I'm thankful we have clean air in the US, and that's been powered by our economic prosperity, but the
Mhm.
air quality in Cairo is awful. I mean, I literally took a white plate with a white napkin, and I saw a black speck, and I wiped it off, and the napkin was black, and the people at my table's eyes just got huge. All Americans,
Wow.
mostly politicians from around the country, they're like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "That's
Mhm.
particulate matter." And they're like, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, they don't care about the pollution control technology." And I've said of
Yeah.
all the technology the Chinese steal from us, it would be nice if they would utilize pollution control technology, but they don't. It's expensive. It actually costs more money to use pollution control technology. During the first Trump administration, I advocated for a Pittsburgh Accord. Let's call on our trading partners to meet air quality standards that improve human health, not focus on CO2.
Mm.
And yet we still don't have a Pittsburgh Accord. And I use the Pittsburgh because the president, when he first got elected, said he represents the people of Pittsburgh, not Paris. And that's
Yes.
why he pulled out of the Paris Accords. And I said, but you look at Pittsburgh, it's a perfect example. 60 years ago, 70 years ago, the rivers were on fire. Pollution was awful. And you go to Pittsburgh now and it's beautiful. And I had an opportunity to go see the president in Pittsburgh during his first administration. And I was like, like, is he going to announce a Pittsburgh Accord? Is he going to do it? And we were really hopeful, but it didn't happen. But I'm still hopeful. I'm still wishful. We
We're
should
still
be calling
trying.
we should be calling on our trading partners to meet air quality standards that improve human health. I mean, it's just silly because these other countries, they don't care about it, so they can produce things good, better. I mean, a lot cheaper than we do here in the United States, and then they flood the global market with those things that are produced with slave labor and poor environmental records. And it's just wrong. But yes, I'd love to come up and talk to people and encourage them to travel and go to other countries and see how when you visit a small island, how it's really running on a diesel generator. And they're virtue signaling by putting solar panels all over it. Oh, we're going to be 100% powered by solar. I'm like, okay, great. What are you going to do when the sun sets? Well, we've got batteries. I'm like, those batteries won't last longer than 2 hours. Then what are you going to do?
I've been encouraging our Portland legislators, those folks who are just like in their southern little bubble, to go see the rest of the state, to see, how the policies that they insist on passing affect the rest of the state. But maybe I should be thinking even bigger, thinking more globally than just at least go look at the rest of the state that you are supposed to represent. Jason, where can folks find you? I want to make sure that folks can find your podcast, your website, socials, all of the above.
Yeah, you can find me on X at Isaac for Energy. It's all spelled out. You can find our website, AmericanEnergyInstitute.com. You can find me on Substack at jasonisaac.substack.com. And that's where I push my podcast out and my opinion editorials that I publish and outlets around the country. And then some stuff I just publish there on Substack. So really X and Substack. You can find me on YouTube. Also, I think I'm the Carbon King or Carbon King on YouTube. But all of that is, through my Substack or AmericanEnergyInstitute.com.
Awesome. We will make sure to include that in the show notes. Jason, thank you so much for being our guest on Speak Up today. Folks, if you have not subscribed to Speak Up on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, please make sure that you do wherever you tune in for your podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks so much, Jason. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Laurel, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me on Speak Up. Appreciate it. Keep up the great work.